Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's show with SportsbookReview.com. I'm your host, Lee Martin, here to talk some UFC with the one and only Matt Ryan from MMA Mania. Now, before we get into all the good, juicy stuff for this upcoming weekend, just go ahead, give this video a like, and subscribe to our channel. That way you never miss a show with us. Now, let's get to it. How are you doing today, Matt?
I've had 4 hours of sleep. I am riding on a latte the size of my forearm with 5 shots of espresso in it, and I keep staring at my television waiting for numbers to tick up. So, just barely surviving.
Sounds like a solid day.
Yeah.
But before we get into this upcoming weekend, definitely let me know how your weekend went. We had Uriah Hall versus Anderson Silva. How did your card go?
Well, kind of called it on the main event. Uriah Hall got the win and got an emphatic stoppage win. Dana White kind of wondering what the hell Uriah Hall was doing in some of those middle rounds. I agree. And it's pretty much going to be the end of Anderson Silva's career inside the UFC octagon. There are options for him to compete after this. I would not be surprised if a Bellator or a ONE FC or someone else in the MMA space, maybe even a PFL, would try to acquire the services of Anderson Silva for 2021. He said he wants to keep fighting. I do not agree with that assessment.
Yeah.
We talked about it in depth last week on the show, but a very going out on his sword ending for Anderson Silva, one of the true greats in the history of not only the UFC but mixed martial arts as a genre. Not necessarily a surprising card, and it's in comparison to this week's card, it's like comparing a filet mignon meal to that of going to In-N-Out Burger at 4 o'clock in the morning when you're toasted.
Definitely. But how about one thing I need to point out? How about Maurice Green? What did I say? Greg Hardy's going to come out strong. He got that knockout, so that's why I don't bet Maurice Green.
That's a fair bet, and we pointed out last week on the show why all the reasons Greg Hardy could win and could lose. The deeper the fight goes, it's worse for Greg Hardy, but Greg Hardy, in terms of being an athletic specimen, having punching power, being emphatic in that sense, he was a dangerous pick. I stayed away from that fight, I believe, and that was a smart move because Greg Hardy came out with the hammers on Saturday night.
Yeah. It was a great weekend, though, but we're going to have an even better weekend this upcoming weekend. So we're back at the UFC Apex, and we're going to have UFC Fight Night, Thiago Santos versus Glover Teixeira, and it's going to be I think it's going to be a great main event, honestly, because I want to see what Glover brings to the octagon this weekend. But let's start off with our breakdowns, all right? So we're going to start off with women's strawweight with Claudia Gadelha versus Xiaonan via Bet Online. Gadelha is plus 122 and Jan is minus 142. Matt, if you can give us your breakdown and pick for this first fight.
All right, that line makes sense to me. Gadelha should be the underdog for me coming into this fight. If you take a look at the Angela Hill fight back in May at one of the 87 UFC Jacksonville cards, that split decision win was a little fakakta, and I believe Gadelha knows it a little bit, even though she was happy that she's won. But let's take a look at some of the intangibles here for Gadelha. Has not finished a fight in 3 years. That was a submission win over Karolina Kowalkiewicz. Has lost to Ioana Jędrzejczyk twice, lost to Jessica Andrade, and lost to Nina Asarov. Has only lost by decision in her career. Has 2 wins by knockout, 7 by submission, and 9 by decision. When you look at Gadelha stepping up in competition, those fights against Jędrzejczyk, Andrade, and Asarov are really big indicators of some flags. She may not be able to withstand a higher level athlete. She was able to skate by in the Hill fight. But let's take a Jiangyan. Has not lost in 11 fights. She's 10-0-0 with 1 no contest. Her last 5 fights have all been by way of decision. She's got a win over Karolina Kowalkiewicz by decision in her last fight as a common opponent to that of Gadelha. But she's knocked out 5 opponents and won 7 decisions. And also Angela Hill, another common opponent, while Gadelha got a split decision win. Xiao Yan won by a unanimous decision and holds an advantage over Gadelha in that respect. For me, it's Gadelha's fight to lose. It's Xiao Yan's fight to win. I would go with her. I would go with the favorite in this fight. When you look at the way these things break down, and I'm really starting to sound like David Axelrod on CNN or John King, because that's all I've been watching for the past 87 years, as long as that's how it's been feeling here. So for me, when you break down this fight and when you look at the intangibles, I go with Xiao Yan, the better fighter, a more consistent fighter heading into Saturday night. And when you look at the wins against Kowalkiewicz and Angela Hill, those are big signs for me that she's going to get the win, and it's probably going to be by decision. We're going to go the full 15 minutes in that fight.
Yeah. Jan's last loss was in 2010. Now, her only loss has been by submission, and she hasn't won by submission, okay? Now, Claudia Gadelha, she has 7 subs underneath her with wins. Do you think there's even a chance that Claudia Gadelha can submit Jan?
There's always a chance. You can't look at anything and say that that's a lock, especially when she has 7 submission wins. Yeah, she's gotten 9 decisions. That's the majority of her margin of victory, but 7 submissions is nothing to sniff at, especially when you're a high-level fighter who's spent the majority of the past few years in the UFC. We take a look. She has not finished a fight in 3 years, though, so that's kind of what I'm looking at more than anything. If she's not been able to get a finish in 3 years and has primarily relied on decision, she's probably going to play a little more of a conservative game plan, probably stick to trying to win on points. She may try to shoot for a submission if she gets into position to do so, but I'm not necessarily sure that's going to end well. Oh. For some reason, I've lost you, Lee. I'm here. Hello?
And we are back. I apologize, guys, for that. Some technical difficulties. It's just a great day overall. But, Matt, I didn't catch the last thing that you said for the first fight with your pick. If you can just give us a recap of what your pick would be for the fight.
So, yeah, I'm going to go with Xiao Yan by decision here, even though you said Gadelha has not landed a submission in over 3 years. So when you look at that, you make a great point, Lee. She has gotten those wins by submission in the past 7 wins by submission, but the deeper you go and you look at the record, you look at the trend, Gadelha is going to fight a little more conservatively if an opportunity is there. And I think the reason we muted me or the audio went down was because my takes was so hot. They're so hot right now that they scalded the wiring here at SBR. But I'm going to go with the favorite here. I'm going to go with Xiao Yan, and I'm going to go by decision.
All right, well, if you guys do want to get in on that fight again via Bet Online, Xiaonan is -142 and Claudia Gadelha is +122. Now, let's move on to the next fight. We have middleweight Ian Heinisch versus Brendan Allen. This is going to be a good fight, too, honestly. Via Bet Online, Brendan Allen is -107 and Ian Heinisch is -113. Matt, like always, your breakdown and pick for this fight.
So for me, this is the fight of the night, especially when it comes to the main card. A little later, we'll look at my pick for the prelim of the night, brought to you by my overwhelming anxiety. Let's take a look at Ian Heinisch for a bit. He is the less experienced pro fighter, but he is the more experienced UFC fighter. He's coming in on a 2-fight losing streak. He broke that, against Gerald Meerschaert back at UFC 250. He was 2-2 in his previous 4 fights. 2 of those being 2-fight win streak, then a 2-fight losing streak. But all those fights going by decision. Once again, going the full 15 minutes. And this time it's going to be in the baby cage. So it's going to be interesting to see how much of that pressure will affect a fighter like Ian Heinisch, who has successfully won at least 50% of his fights by a finish. He's got 5 knockout wins, 2 submission wins. The rest of those are by way of decision. He's only lost by decision or submission, never been knocked out, but his chin will be put to the test against Brendan Allen, who has won 5 of his fights by KO, but 8 by submission, which is where you're going to want to look in this fight for a Brendan Allen victory. He's on a 7-fight winning streak, but most recently has got a decision over Kyle Dauskas. All other fights he's had inside the UFC have been wins by either TKO or submission, primarily submission. When you talk about big-level opponents prior to the UFC, Brendan Allen lost to Eric Anders while in the LFA, but his biggest win to date was a submission win over Kevin Holland back in 2019. So this is probably going to be the fight of the night. I think this is going to be way more aggressive than the opening fight on the card. Heinisch definitely has a shot. And Lee, what are the odds for this fight?
Brendan Allen is -107 and Ian Heinisch is -113.
Ooh, so that's a really close. The odds makers know what they're doing here in regards to this fight, in my opinion. Dave and his punch and parlay coming out a little bit later this week may disagree with me a little bit here in terms of making Allen the favorite by a modest margin, -113 to -107. Pardon me, I would actually make Allen the underdog, and I disagree with that. I think Allen's the favorite to win this fight. I expect there to be a finish in this fight, and I think Allen's going to finish this off middle of the 3rd round with a submission. Yep. Not necessarily a lock, but I expect a more exciting conclusion to this fight than in the opener.
Yeah, and I'm surprised that Brendan Allen is not the big favorite in this fight. His last loss was in 2018. So that's why I'm going to go with Brendan Allen for this fight. Ian Heinisch, much respect to him, but again, I'm just a Brendan Allen fan. So if you guys do want to get in on this fight again via Bet Online, Brendan Allen is -107 and Ian Heinisch is -113. Let's move on to the next fight. We have Bantamweight Raoni Barcelos versus Khalid Taha. Via Bet Online, Barcelos is -365 and Taha is +290. Matt, if you can give us your breakdown and pick for this fight.
All right, so that +290, that is an interesting stat for Taha. This is his first fight since testing positive for Stromamide, which is a LASIK, which is a blood thinner. The fight he had was overturned, and he was also missing weight in that fight. So a lot of questions for Taha at bantamweight, whether or not it's a wise decision to do that. He was fighting at featherweight prior to this, and did so at UFC 236, where he got a knockout out of Boston Salmon. He's got 9 wins by knockout, 3 by submission, 2 by decision. I think this fight's going to be decided on the scale on Friday more than anything. This is going to be one of those fights where it's a little questionable. You got to bring in the fact of COVID-19 and whether that will cause him a little bit of consternation on the scale. If he was able to miss it in his last fight and he was on a banned substance, how much of this will affect him anyway? He's been training in his time off. He's been off for over a year at this point. Has he been able to diet and create a meal plan and an exercise plan that keeps him at bantamweight? Or is this going to be a situation to where he has to move up to 145 and live at 145, because we saw that he has power there. He knocked out Boston Salmon. He's been able to get some wins under his belt at 145, but it seems like he wants to be a mainstay at 135. Let's take a look at Barcelos really quick, though. He's on an 8-fight winning streak, the last 4 coming in the UFC. This is his 5th UFC fight. all UFC wins but his win over Said Nurmagomedov, which was his last fight, came away by submission or TKO. This guy's going to be hunting heads and going for the submission and going up against a fighter who may or may not be depleted coming off the scale on Friday. That's a big advantage for Barcelos. He's only lost by submission. Taha has 3 wins by submission in his career, but he looks to go for the knockout. He's got 9 wins by knockout, only 2 by decision, while Barcelos has 8 wins by knockout, 2 by submission, and 5 by decision. So Barcelos has the advantage here in terms of range of victory, ways and paths to victory, which has been a phrase you've been hearing all week long. But right now for Barcelos, his clearest path to victory is within the first 14 minutes of this fight. But he may be able to pull out a decision. I think Barcelos, over the course of this fight, will be able to outpace Taha because Taha has been off for so long. And also, I keep going back to it. I hate being ad nauseum about it, but you have to look at this as a huge variable. He missed weight while on a banned substance. That is a huge indicator for someone who shouldn't be at bantamweight. He should be at featherweight. And I think that's going to cost him victory here on Saturday night. And we're going to see Barcelos go to 16-1, 5-0 inside the octagon.
Yep, I'm with you on that one. So if you guys do want to get in on that fight, again, via BetOnline, Barcelos is minus 365 and Taha is plus 290. Let's move on to the next fight. This is a good fight, too. We have heavyweight Andrei Arlovski versus Tanner Boser. And I'm going to say right now, Tanner Boser. Tanner Boser via BetOnline is minus 275 and Arlovski is plus 235. I want to hear what you got to say for this, Matt.
All right. This fight exists just so Tanner Boser can get a win over a former UFC heavyweight champion. This fight should not be on the main card. It certainly should not be the co-main event. And that's not an insult to Andrei Arlovski. It's not an insult to Tanner Boser. But it feels out of place here. When you see Andrei Arlovski in a co-main event, you suddenly feel like you've gone back in time 10 to 15 years. And that is the weird state of the UFC heavyweight division. And I talk about it a lot on the show. Me and Dave, and also you, Lee, we talk about it as well. The UFC heavyweight division is a quandary because for every Stipe Miocic, Francis Ngannou, a Curtis Blades level fighter, we get these Andrei Arlovskis who have been around forever, who are kind of carrying water in the division, acting as gatekeepers. And I really don't know if the UFC heavyweight division should be carrying these fighters anymore, if these gatekeeping fights are necessary. Because we have a guy like Andrei Arlovski who's 41 years old. We saw Anderson Silva at 45 compete in the main event last week. But the difference between Anderson Silva and Andrei Arlovski is massive. And Andrei Arlovski has survived every major wave of the UFC heavyweight division, going back to the Randy Couture days, into the Lesnar era, into the current era of Miocic, DC, Blades, and Ngannou. This is the deepest heavyweight division in the history of the UFC. And this is a former UFC heavyweight champion who has not had a winning streak since 2018, but those wins came over Junior Albini and Stefan Struve, not necessarily the highest of high-level competition. He's been 4-4-1 in all fights since that winning streak in 2018, barely at the 500 mark, and has not scored a stoppage win since defeating Travis Brown, someone who's not in the UFC anymore, back at UFC 187. For reference, we just had UFC 254. So it has been a long time from when Andrei Arlovski was a dangerous fighter in the UFC heavyweight division. And let's take a look at Tanner Boser. He's 4-1 in his last 5. 3 of those are by stoppage. His last loss was to Cyril Gagné back in December of 2019. And his last 2 wins were by TKO back in July against Rafael Pessoa and Felipe Lins back in June. This is a guy who's fought 2 times already this year in back-to-back months. This is the longest break he's had all year. And that indicates to me that he's going to come for Andrei Arlovski's head. Mm-hmm. And that scares me because Andrei Arlovski, former UFC heavyweight champion, deserves his roses, deserves his respect. But it's really an indictment on the UFC heavyweight division, in my opinion, that this fight is in the co-main event. Last week we talked about earlier, Maurice Green and Greg Hardy. The UFC heavyweight division right now is really, really weird. And I can't make heads or tails of the middle and bottom of this division. And this kind of typifies it for me. where these fighters are viewed in the same class or in the same stratosphere, and then you look at the level above it and you just see the caliber of athlete in the heavyweight division. Mm-hmm. It just feels off kilter for me.
The more I think about it, though, the more I just think of Tanner Boser coming out, yes, wanting to get Arlovski's head, and he's going to get a knockout. And I'm looking in the chats, too. Davy Jones says Boser by KO, and I agree. He is going to come out feisty. I think he's going to get a knockout or TKO this fight. So I'm personally going to go with Tanner Boser, and I may throw him in a parlay just because that's minus 275 with him, but I'm going with Tanner Boser. I trust the guy, so I don't know about you.
That's the bet to go with. If you're looking for a bet on this card to throw into a parlay or something that's a definitive victory, this is the fight. Tanner Boser getting the win here, and that's probably why they positioned it in the co-main event. Mm-hmm. And it's either just because it's a palate cleanser before a really compelling main event, or they're just looking to prop up Tanner Boser, put him in the conversation in the top 15, top 10 in the UFC heavyweight division, and level him up to maybe fighting Greg Hardy at some point, or fighting a Curtis Blades, or even a Derek Lewis down the line.
I can see that. But honestly, I can see why they would put him in the main event, co-main, just because Tanner Boser's name is growing so fast. Just because of, I don't even know how to put it into words. He is just such an aggressive fighter that when you watch him fight, you're just like, you're happy. You're excited to watch him fight because you know he's going to get a finish somehow. And
that is true.
I'm all over the place.
No, but we've seen in the UFC before where they've propped up fighters really fast against older fighters or older champions.
Yeah.
And they get their clocks cleaned. Mm-hmm. So that's why I find I get the booking of it, but I also can see why this may not be the best positioning for a Tanner Boser right now. And you know what? I'm probably going to be proven wrong next time we come back to you with the card next week. I'll be happy to say I was wrong, but there's a lot, I get it, but I don't like it.
No, I understand. But so I guess we'll see what happens next week when we come back. But on to the main event. This is something that I really want to hear what you say, just because I do love Glover Teixeira. We have light heavyweight. Thiago Santos versus Glover Teixeira via Bet Online. Santos is minus 235 and Teixeira is plus 200. And I'm telling you right now that plus 200, for me personally, looks good. I know a lot of factors, like bad factors, let's say, would be his age. He's 41 years old, but that doesn't mean anything because he just not knocked out, but TKO'd Anthony Smith this year. So I feel like he is capable of doing anything. So that's why for me personally, I like that plus 200. But Matt, I want to hear what you got to say for the main event.
Well, let's take a look at Glover Teixeira's curriculum vitae really quick. 31-7, as you said. Got a stoppage win over Anthony Smith in his last fight. He's in the middle of a 4-fight win streak right now. 3 of those wins have come by either TKO or submission, so only 1 fight in this current streak has seen him go to a decision, and I do believe this is a 5-round fight, and that'll play into the favor of Santos. But let's take a look at this. He's tied with your favorite, Lee Oven St. Preux, for the most stoppage victories in UFC light heavyweight division history. And he's tied with OSP, John Jones, Paul Craig, and Misha Kurinov with the most submission victories in the UFC light heavyweight division with 5. So this is a guy who knows how to stop a fight and make it an emphatic one. And Glover Teixeira is a dangerous fighter. He's a dangerous fighter, a true veteran of the octagon. But let's take a look at Thiago Santos. Who was his last opponent? John Jones. And why did John Jones win that fight? Because of kicks to the shin. And it debilitated Santos in a fight that many thought Santos could have won. Like, you look at that fight, you go back to that fight, the last 2 title defenses of John Jones weren't necessarily his best efforts. And you could say that he didn't really try all that hard. And you could say that about the Dom Reyes fight because of what we saw in the Blachowicz fight a few months ago. Mm-hmm. But Thiago Santos came to play in that fight against John Jones, and he has the scars to prove it. He's been out for almost a year and a half, and prior to that, he had a 4-fight winning streak, and also he stopped Anthony Smith too in 2018 in the second round. And let's take a look at this. 15 wins in his career by knockout or TKO. only 1 submission, and 5 by decision. This is not someone looking for a long night at the office. I think Thiago Santos is going to be headhunting. I think that he might be a little overeager for his first fight in a long time. I'm going to probably see Teixeira win the first 2 rounds. But the deeper we get into this fight, it's going to be Santos's fight. And once we get into those extra rounds, I can see either late in the 3rd or maybe middle of the 4th, Santos getting the stoppage win.
The thing is, Glover, this is where I'm stuck. Glover is really good at pacing himself. He's a very patient fighter. When he finds his opening, he goes for it. Just look at the Anthony Smith fight. He paced himself throughout the entire fight and managed to get that TKO. Now, Thiago Santos, he's going to come out wanting that knockout or TKO. So it all depends on Glover Teixeira if he can, or if his chin holds up, or if he can manage a submission or even a knockout himself or TKO himself. So this is where I'm stuck. I still need to look into it, but I'm loving that plus 200 on Glover Teixeira.
It's a good play, and if you're looking to parlay it or if you're looking to just stand alone, that's a great bet. But you talk about Teixeira being patient. Santos has had over a year and a half to reflect on what he could have done right and what he could have done wrong, and now a wide open light heavyweight division. A win here could prop him back up into conversation to fight maybe the winner of Adesanya Blachowicz, which is also a crazy thing that Dana White just kind of dropped and said, oh, Israel Adesanya is going to fight for the light heavyweight title. Like, what? That's a thing. That's a thing that's happening. And I'm throwing babies in the air. I'm celebrating for that fight. But for Santos, that time may have made him a more patient fighter. He might have nerves early. First fight back in a main event against a top-level light heavyweight. This is not an easy fight for Santos in no way, shape, or form. But I think once he gets those nerves out, we're going to see a more patient Santos, and we're going to see a more deliberate Santos, and he's going to find his angles. And I think that he'll be able to get the win on Saturday night.
All right, so I guess we shall see. But if you guys want to get in on the main event via BetOnline, Thiago Santos is minus 235 and Glover Teixeira is plus 200. Now, before I close everything up, I just got a couple more questions. Now, Matt, do you have a prelim fight that stands out to you for this weekend?
Well, let's take a look at our prelim fight brought to you by my overwhelming anxiety and caffeine addiction. And also, just as a note, Santos is ranked number 1, Teixeira number 3 in the light heavyweight division. So, this is not a jamoke fight in any stretch of the imagination. You know what? In terms of, I like fighters in the prelims. I necessarily don't like fights. But Giga Chikadze is fighting in one of the featured prelim fights against Jamie Simmons. And then let's take a look at Trevin Giles versus Bevon Lewis. That one's a pretty big fight. Lewis 8-2, Giles only 12-2 in comparison. Both of these guys are similar in reach, 74 to 79. That 5-inch advantage really big, and then a 3-foot height advantage for Bevon Lewis. But Trevin Giles, pretty good fighter. I think Giles will get the win there, but I think that's going to be the fight to watch out for. But anytime Giga Chikadze is fighting, I think that's always a fun fight to watch. We've got Max Griffin on the card. This prelim card is full of some pretty solid up-and-comers, but I think the top 2 fights, you're going to want to tune in to ESPN Plus a little bit early on Saturday night before 10 p.m. Eastern here in the States and watch those last 2 prelim fights before we get rolling with the main card at the Apex.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Giga Chikadze just because he is minus 550. Yeah, and Jamie Simmons is plus 400. So Jesus. I liked that fight until I looked at the odds. So that's a little parlay piece right there for sure. Just saying.
You roll that into something. I would put decent money. I would parlay that. Will be in Dave's Punch and Parlay this week on SBR.
Yeah, I think so too. I will be a little shocked if it's not. But how about a favorite, like a fight on the main card instead of prelims?
Well, I spoke about it earlier, but I will go back and I'll say that my fight to watch out for on the main card is Heinisch and Allen. I think that's the best fight on this card, the most equal fight on the card between. Even though Allen is not ranked and Heinisch is ranked 15th, that's a gatekeeper fight right there for Brendan Allen. If he gets that win, he's automatically in the top 15, in my opinion. Gadelha and Xiaonan are number 4 and number 8 at strawweight. So some ranked fights here. Obviously, Tanner Boser, that's a fight you're going to want to watch and you're going to want to see just to see if he pinatas Andrei Arlovski early. But that fight, to me, Brendan Allen, Ian Heinisch, is the fight of the night. That's the focus fight outside of the main event.
I'm looking at the chat right now, and Davy Jones says Giga, Romanov, and Boser. That'd be a nice parlay.
That's a piece. Yeah, I like that. I like that.
I like that. Well, that's all I have for this weekend. We have UFC Fight Night, Thiago Santos versus Glover Teixeira. It's going to be this Saturday, November 7th at the UFC Apex again. If you guys are not following Matt on Twitter, definitely give him a follow at MRyan Consulting. And it was so sad that Dave could not join us again this week. So, of course, give Dave a follow on Twitter, _. Check out his articles at sbrpicks.com/UFC. You'll find out all the stuff he's getting into for this weekend, so I highly advise it. Also, be sure to give SBR a follow on Twitter and on Instagram at SBR Sports Picks. And again, for more breakdowns and picks by all of SBR's UFC experts, just go to sbrpicks.com/UFC. I wish you all the best of luck this weekend. Best of luck this weekend, Matt. And I hope you all have a wonderful week. I'll catch you next week.
Stay hydrated.